The laughter hit Alara Whitmore like a physical blow. She stood in the doorway of the Silver Spur Saloon, her threadbare dress hanging loose on her thin frame, the hem torn and muddy from the 3-day walk into Redemption Creek. The fabric had once been blue, a pretty cornflower blue her mother had chosen, but now it was faded to gray, patched with mismatched cloth, and stained with the evidence of poverty that no amount of scrubbing could erase. Every eye in the crowded room turned toward her, and the music stopped mid-note. The piano player's fingers froze on the keys. A woman in an emerald dress with ostrich feathers in her hair pointed at Alara and whispered something to her companion, and they both dissolved into giggles behind gloved hands. Alara's cheeks burned hot despite the cold November wind that followed her inside. She'd known this would happen. She prepared herself for it during every mile of that long walk, carrying her sleeping 6-year-old brother Micah on her back when his legs gave out, rationing the last of their bread. Sleeping under trees because they had no money for lodging. She'd told herself that dignity wasn't measured in dresses or shoes or the judgment of strangers. But standing here now, with dozens of well-dressed people staring at her like she was something dirty that had blown in with the tumbleweed, all her courage crumbled. A man in an expensive suit nudged his friend and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Did someone forget to close the door to the poorhouse?" More laughter rippled through the room. Alara's hand tightened on Micah's shoulder, and she felt him press closer against her side, confused and frightened by the cruelty in their voices. This was supposed to be a celebration, the annual Harvest Festival dance, where the whole town gathered to mark the end of another hard year with music and food and community. Alara had walked 3 days from their failing homestead because she received word that her Uncle Samuel would be here, and Uncle Samuel was her last hope. Their parents had died 6 months ago in a fever outbreak, leaving Alara at 19 to care for Micah alone on land that refused to grow anything but dust and despair. They were starving. The well had run dry. The crops had failed. And the bank was coming in 2 weeks to take the land unless she could pay $300 she didn't have. Uncle Samuel was her father's brother, wealthy from his cattle business, and Alara had swallowed her pride and written him a letter begging for help. He'd replied with a single line, "Come to the harvest dance in Redemption Creek. We'll talk." So she'd come, wearing the only dress she owned, with her brother's hand in hers and hope fragile as spider's silk in her chest. But she hadn't expected this. She'd known she looked poor, but she hadn't understood how much people would enjoy her poverty, how they'd feast on her humiliation like it was entertainment laid out for their pleasure. A woman in a yellow dress with perfect ringlets said to her companion, "How embarrassing. Someone should tell her this isn't a charity event." The companion snickered. Maybe she's looking for work in the kitchen or the stables. They weren't even trying to whisper anymore. Alara scanned the crowd desperately, looking for Uncle Samuel's face, but she couldn't find him in the sea of cruel eyes and mocking smiles. Micah tugged at her hand. "Alara," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Why are they laughing at us?" Before she could answer, a man stepped forward from the crowd. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing dusty leather pants and a simple cotton shirt that had seen better days. His boots were scuffed, his hat was battered, and there was mud on his jaw like he'd been working cattle all day and hadn't bothered to clean up properly. He wasn't handsome in the classical sense. His nose had been broken at least once, and a scar cut through his left eyebrow, but his eyes were the color of creek water in summer, clear and deep and steady. He walked right up to Alara, ignoring the whispers and stares, and stopped about 3 feet away. The entire room held its breath. Then he removed his hat, held it against his chest, and said in a voice that carried every corner, "Ma'am, I don't know who you are or where you came from, but I want you to know something." He paused, his eyes locked on hers. "You are the finest woman here tonight, and anyone who can't see that is a damn fool." The silence that followed was absolute. Alara stared at him, unable to speak, unable to breathe, while the whole world seemed to tilt on its axis. Alara had been 13 when her parents decided to leave Missouri and try their luck in Arizona territory. Her father, Robert Whitmore, had been a schoolteacher with dreams bigger than his salary, and her mother, Clara, had believed in those dreams with a fierce faith that only love can sustain. They bought a homestead claim site unseen, 160 acres along Copper Creek. promising soil and water and a fresh start for their family. The journey west had taken 4 months, and Alara still remembered the taste of trail dust and the sound of wagon wheels creaking through endless prairie. She'd been in charge of watching 7-year-old Micah, making sure he didn't wander off or get stepped on by the oxen, and she'd done it with the careful seriousness of a girl who understood that responsibility was the price of being the oldest. When they'd finally arrived at their land, her father had stood at the edge of the property with his arms spread wide and said, "Look at this, Clara. Look at what we're going to build." Her mother had smiled and squeezed his hand, and Alara had wanted to believe in their vision. But even at 13, she could see the reality. The soil was rocky and hard. The creek was barely a trickle, and the nearest town was 15 miles away over rough country. Still, they'd worked. God, how they'd worked. Her father had built a small cabin with his own hands, and her mother had planted a garden that struggled against the unforgiving sun. Alara had learned to shoot to ride, to mend fences, and milk the cow they bought with their last savings. Micah had grown from a toddler into a boy, running wild in the open spaces, catching lizards and collecting rocks, and believing this harsh land was paradise because he'd never known anything different. Before the story goes any further, pause with me for a moment. If this tale has pulled you in, let me know where you're watching from. Drop a comment with your country and the time it is right now, whether it's early morning in Africa, late night in America, or evening somewhere across Europe. I want to see how far the story has traveled. If stories like this matter to you, take a second to like the video and subscribe. It tells me to keep bringing you powerful Wild West stories that dig deeper than legends and gunfights. Now, let's return to the story, because what happens next changes everything. For 6 years, they'd survived. Barely. The crops yielded just enough to keep them fed, though never enough to sell for profit. The cow died in a drought, and they couldn't afford another. Her father took odd jobs in town when he could find them, swallowing his pride to work as a laborer instead of a teacher. Her mother's hands grew rough and cracked from washing other people's laundry to earn extra coins. Alara watched her parents age faster than they should have, watched their dreams shrink down to simple survival, watched the light in their eyes dim a little more each year, but they never gave up. Her father still read to them every night from the few books they owned, and her mother still sang while she cooked, and they still held hands when they thought the children weren't looking. Alara had believed that love and hard work would be enough. She believed that if they just kept trying, eventually the land would reward their faithfulness. Then the fever came. It swept through the territory like wildfire, killing indiscriminately, young and old, rich and poor, faithful and faithless. Her mother caught it first, collapsing while hanging laundry, her forehead burning hot to the touch. Her father caught it 3 days later while nursing her. Alara had tried everything: cold compresses, willow bark tea, prayers whispered desperately into the darkness. But the fever was relentless. Her mother died on a Sunday morning with her father holding her hand, and her father followed 2 days later, calling Clara's name with his last breath. Alara had buried them both under the cottonwood tree behind the cabin, digging the graves herself because they had no money for an undertaker and no neighbors close enough to help. Micah had stood beside her, not really understanding that Mama and Papa weren't coming back, asking when they'd wake up. And Alara had lied. "Soon," she'd said, her voice breaking. "They'll wake up soon." But they didn't wake up, and suddenly Alara was alone with a 6-year-old brother and a homestead that was falling apart and debts she hadn't even known existed. The bank held the mortgage, $300 still owed, due in 6 months. The general store in town held a tab for supplies her father had bought on credit. Even the doctor who'd come out to see her parents, though there was nothing he could do, expected payment. Alara had counted the money they had left, $8.37. She looked at the barren fields and the dry creek bed and the cabin that needed repairs she didn't know how to make. She thought about her Uncle Samuel, her father's older brother who'd made his fortune in cattle and lived in a big house in Redemption Creek. Her father had been proud. Too proud to ask his wealthy brother for help, too proud to admit that his dreams had failed. But Alara couldn't afford pride. She had Micah to think about, so she'd written a letter, her hand shaking, begging for help from a man she'd only met twice in her life. And when his reply came telling her to come to the harvest dance, she'd allowed herself to hope. That hope had carried her through 3 days of walking, and that hope had just died in a saloon full of laughter and cruel eyes. His name was Thaddeus Cole, though everyone called him Thad. He was 26 years old and worked as a ranch hand for the Triple Bar outfit, spending his days breaking horses and mending fences and sleeping under stars more often than under a roof. He'd grown up in Texas, the youngest of 5 boys, and had learned early that life wasn't fair and nobody was coming to save you. His father had died when Thad was 8, kicked by a horse that spooked during a storm, and his mother had worked herself to death trying to feed 5 hungry sons. By the time Thad was 15, he was on his own, drifting from ranch to ranch, learning that the only thing you could truly count on was your own 2 hands and your word. If you said you'd do something, you did it. If you saw something wrong, you spoke up. Simple rules. But they'd kept him alive and employed in a territory where both were harder to come by than gold. He'd come to the harvest dance reluctantly, only because his boss, Mr. Fletcher, had insisted the whole crew attend. Thad hated these kind of gatherings. All the preening and posturing, women in fancy dresses judging each other, men bragging about land and cattle and money. He preferred the honest company of horses, who didn't care if your boots were scuffed or your shirt was patched. But he cleaned up as best he could, brushed most of the dust off his pants, and showed up because Mr. Fletcher was a good man who deserved loyalty. Thad had been standing near the bar, nursing a whiskey and counting the minutes until he could politely leave. When the girl appeared in the doorway, the laughing had started immediately, and Thad had felt his jaw tighten. He'd seen poverty before. Hell, he'd lived it. But there was something about the way these well-fed, well-dressed people were mocking a girl who'd clearly walked through hell to get here that made his blood boil. Then he'd looked at her face. Really looked, past the ragged dress and the mud-stained hem and the exhaustion shadowing her eyes. He'd seen pride struggling against humiliation, courage wrestling with despair, and underneath it all, a fierce determination that reminded him of his mother in her final days, refusing to break even when the world was determined to crush her. The girl was thin, too thin, with hollows under her cheekbones and calluses on her hands visible even from across the room. But she stood straight, her chin up, protecting the small boy beside her with mother's fierceness, though she couldn't be much more than a child herself. And something in Thad's chest had cracked open. He'd moved before thinking, walking through that crowd of jackals, driven by an instinct he couldn't name but couldn't ignore. When he'd spoken those words, "You're the finest woman here tonight," he'd meant every syllable. The room erupted in whispers after he spoke. Some scandalized, some curious, all of them suddenly uncertain. Thad kept his eyes on the girl, watching her process his words, seeing disbelief war with desperate hope in her expression. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I," she started, her voice barely a whisper. Then a man pushed the crowd, and Thad recognized Samuel Whitmore, one of the richest cattle barons in the territory. Samuel was a big man, running to fat now that he had money, with a thick mustache and cold eyes. He stopped beside the girl and looked her up and down with undisguised disdain. "Ilara," he said, his voice dripping with disappointment. "I told you to come to the dance. I didn't tell you to embarrass me in front of the entire town." His words hit her like slaps, and Thad saw her flinch with each one. "Uncle Samuel," Ilara said, her voice stronger now despite the trembling in her hands. "I walked 3 days to see you. I came because you said we needed to talk. About Micah and me. About the homestead." Samuel waved a dismissive hand. Yes, we'll talk. But not here. Not with you looking like that." He gestured at her dress like it was something diseased. "Go around to the kitchen door. Tell them I sent you. They'll give you something to eat and maybe find you some decent clothes. We'll discuss your situation tomorrow." He was already turning away, already dismissing her, when Thad spoke again. "That's no way to treat family." His voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a knife. Samuel turned slowly, his face reddening. "I beg your pardon?" Thad met his eyes without flinching. "I said, that's no way to treat family, especially family that's walked 3 days to see you." The entire saloon held its breath. Nobody talked to Samuel Whitmore like that. Nobody who valued their job. Anyway, and Thad had just declared war in front of everyone who mattered. Ilera had known her uncle was cold. Her father had told stories about Samuel's ruthlessness in business, his willingness to step on anyone to get what he wanted. But she hadn't expected this level of casual cruelty, this public humiliation served up like it was her fault for being poor. She stood frozen, caught between the cowboy who defended her and the uncle who was her last hope, feeling the weight of every eye in the room pressing down on her shoulders. Micah's hand tightened in hers, and she could feel him shaking. He was hungry. They'd run out of food yesterday, and tired and confused by all these angry adult voices. She needed to get him somewhere safe, somewhere warm, somewhere with food, even if it meant swallowing her pride and going to the kitchen door like a beggar, even if it meant accepting her uncle's contempt as the price of survival. "Come on, Micah," she whispered, tugging gently at his hand. But before she could move, the cowboy, Thaddeus Cole, she'd heard someone say his name, stepped between her and the door. "You don't have to go through the kitchen," he said, his voice gentle now, meant only for her. "You're a guest here, same as anyone. You got just as much right to that front door as any of these peacocks." Ilera looked up at him, really seeing him for the first time. He was maybe 6 or 7 years older than her, with sun-weathered skin and hands that told stories of hard work. There was kindness in his eyes, but also something fierce and protective that made her want to cry because she couldn't remember the last time anyone had stood up for her. "Thank you," she managed to say, "for what you said, but I can't. I need my uncle's help. I can't afford to make him angry." Thad's jaw tightened. He's already angry. Men like that are always angry when someone reminds them they're supposed to be decent. But he stepped aside, not blocking her path anymore, just letting her choose. Ilera appreciated that more than he could know. The choice, the respect implicit in it. She nodded to him once, then led Micah around the edge of the room toward the side door that led to the kitchens. People moved out of their way now, no longer laughing but watching with varying degrees of pity or disgust or uncomfortable guilt. Samuel had already disappeared back into the crowd, done with them. The woman in the emerald dress whispered to her companion. How mortifying. Imagine being related to that. Ilera kept her eyes forward and her back straight, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. The kitchen was warm and bustling, full of women in stained aprons preparing food for party. A Mexican woman with gray streaks in her black hair looked up when Ilera and Micah entered, her expression softening immediately. "Ay, Nina," she said, taking in Ilera's hollow cheeks and Micah's exhausted eyes. "You look like you walked through El Infierno itself. Come, sit." She pulled out 2 chairs at a small table in the corner and immediately began loading plates with food: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh bread still warm from the oven. Micah's eyes went wide with desperate hunger, and he looked up at Ilera for permission. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak, and he fell on the food like a starving animal, because that's what they were now, starving animals at the mercy of strangers' charity. The Mexican woman sat down across from Ilera, studying her face. "My name is Rosa," she said. "I work for Senor Whitmore. You are Sabrina, yes? His niece?" Ilera nodded, forcing down a bite of chicken that tasted like ashes in her mouth despite being delicious. "I'm Ilera. This is my brother Micah. Our parents died 6 months ago. We're in trouble. I came to ask my uncle for help." Rose's expression darkened. "I worked for that man 12 years, she said quietly. "He is not known for his generosity, especially not a family. His own son he sends away to boarding school and visits maybe twice a year. What kind of father does this?" She shook her head. "Be careful, Nina. Men like Samuel Whitmore, they do not help without expecting something in return, and usually the price is too high." Her words sent a chill down Ilera's spine, but what choice did she have? She owed $300. She had less than $9 to her name. The bank was coming in 2 weeks. Without her uncle's help, she and Micah would lose everything. The land, the cabin, the graves where their parents were buried. They'd end up in an orphanage, separated because Micah was too young to place with her. Or worse, on the streets, homeless and desperate. Ilera had seen what happened to homeless girls in the territories. She'd rather die than let that be her story. So she'd accept whatever price Uncle Samuel demanded. She'd swallow her pride, endure his contempt, do whatever it took to keep Micah safe. That's what her parents would have wanted. That's what love required. Even as her heart whispered that the cowboy's eyes had held something different. Respect without conditions, kindness without price. She pushed the thought away. Cowboys didn't solve problems. Money did. And her uncle had the money she needed. The next morning, Alara and Micah met Uncle Samuel in his office at the back of the Whitmore Cattle Company building. Rose had found them a small room in the boarding house to sleep in, paid for by Samuel, though delivered without warmth, and had given Alara one of her own dresses to wear. It was simple brown cotton, warm but clean, and it fit reasonably well, though it was a bit short. Alara had braided her hair tightly, trying to look presentable and capable and worthy of help. Micah sat beside her on a hard wooden chair, swinging his legs and looking around at the mounted elk heads and leather-bound ledgers that filled the office. Samuel sat behind his massive desk like a king on a throne, smoking a cigar and studying them with calculating eyes. Finally, he spoke. "Your father was a fool, Alara. You know that, don't you?" The words hit like a punch, but Alara kept her face neutral. "My father was a good man who worked hard and loved his family." Samuel waved his cigar dismissively. "Good men die poor. Smart men die rich. Your father could have worked for me, learned the cattle business, made something of himself. But no, he had to go chase his stupid dream of being a farmer on land that wouldn't grow weeds if he watered them with gold." He leaned forward. "Now you're here, begging me to clean up his mess, to save you from the consequences of his foolishness." Alara's hands curled into fists in her lap, but she forced her voice to stay steady. "I'm asking you to help your brother's children. We're family." Samuel laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Family. Your father disowned me years ago when I told him his homesteading plan was idiocy. He was too proud to listen, too proud to take my money. And now you show up, not too proud at all, wanting what he refused." "I'll pay you back," Alara said desperately. "Every cent. I'll work, Samuel cut her off. "With what skills? You're a 19-year-old girl with a 6th grade education and no prospects. You think someone's going to hire you to do what exactly? Wash laundry? Clean houses? That might earn you 50 cents a day if you're lucky. It would take you years to pay back $300, even if you could find steady work." He paused, letting the hopelessness of her situation sink in. Alara felt tears pricking at her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Beside her, Micah sensed attention and pressed closer against her side. Samuel watched them for a long moment, then leaned back in his chair. "However," he said slowly, "I might be willing to help, under certain conditions." Alara's heart jumped. What conditions? Samuel tapped ash from his cigar into a crystal tray. "I have a business associate named Cornelius Blackwell. He owns the largest dry goods store in Redemption Creek and has investments in mining operations throughout the territory. He's 47 years old, widowed, no children. He's been looking for a wife, someone young, capable, who can manage a household and represent him properly in society." Alara's blood turned to ice as she realized where this was going. "He saw you last night at the dance," Samuel continued. "Despite your appearance, he was intrigued. He's willing to overlook your poverty if you're willing to marry him. I'll pay off your debts as a wedding gift. You'll have security, status, a comfortable home. Your brother can stay with you until he's old enough for boarding school." "No," Alara said immediately, the word ripping out of her before she could stop it. "I won't, I can't." Samuel's expression hardened. "Can't what?" "Marry a respectable man who's offering you a life infinitely better than what you have? Do you have any idea how many women would jump at this opportunity?" He leaned forward again, his voice dropping to something cold and threatening. "Let me be clear, Alara. This is the only help I'm offering. Marry Cornelius, and I'll pay your debts. Refuse, and you and your brother can find your own way. I'll give you until tomorrow evening to decide. After that, my offer expires, and you'll never hear from me again." He stood, signaling the meeting was over. "Rosa will show you out." Think carefully about what you're throwing away if you refuse. Ilera stood on shaking legs, pulling Micah up with her. As they walked toward the door, Samuel called out, "Oh, and Ilera, I'd advise you not to share this conversation with anyone. Cornelius is a private man and wouldn't appreciate his business being gossiped about. If word gets out that you rejected him, I'll consider that a breach of confidence, and any offer will be permanently withdrawn." It was a threat disguised as advice, and they both knew it. Ilera nodded mutely and fled the office, Micah running to keep up with her quick steps. Outside in the bright morning sun, she felt like she couldn't breathe. Marry a 47-year-old stranger, give herself to a man she'd never met in exchange for $300. It felt like being sold, like being turned into property, like becoming something less than human. But what choice did she have? Without that money, she and Micah would lose everything. With it, they'd have security, stability, a future, even if that future meant Ilera sacrificing her own dreams, her own hopes, her own self on the altar of survival. Was that not what love required? Was that not what her parents would have wanted? Micah safe and fed and educated. Even if it cost Ilera everything, she walked blindly through the streets of Redemption Creek, her brother's hand in hers, and wondered if there was any way out of this trap that didn't involve destroying herself completely. Ilera spent the day walking the streets of Redemption Creek with Micah, avoiding returning to the boarding house because she couldn't bear to sit still with her thoughts. They wandered past the general store, the bank, the small schoolhouse where children's voices drifted through open windows. Micah asked questions about everything. Why were the buildings so tall? Could they get candy at that shop? Would they stay here forever? Ilera answered mechanically, her mind churning through her impossible situation. Marriage to Cornelius Blackwell, a man nearly 30 years her senior, a stranger who'd seen her humiliated and decided she was broken enough to be affordable. The thought made her skin crawl, but every time she considered refusing, she looked at Micah's trusting face and felt the weight of responsibility crush her chest. What right did she have to choose her own happiness over his survival? As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple, Ilera found herself near the edge of town where the saloons and boarding houses gave way to corrals and work yards. She could hear cattle lowing in the distance and see dust rising from where cowboys worked late into the evening. Then she heard a familiar voice. "Ma'am? Miss Whitmore?" She turned to find Thaddeus Cole walking toward her, leading a magnificent chestnut mare by the reins. He'd clearly been working. His shirt was damp with sweat, his face streaked with dirt, but he smiled when he saw her. "Thought that was you. You settling in all right?" There was genuine concern in his voice, and something about it made Ilera's careful composure crack. To her horror, she felt tears start to fall. Thad's smile vanished immediately. He tied his horse to a nearby post and approached slowly, like she was a spooked animal that might bolt. "Hey now," he said softly. "What happened? Did someone hurt you?" Ilera shook her head, unable to speak past a sob trapped in her throat. Micah looked up at her with wide, frightened eyes. "Ilera's been sad all day," he told Thad seriously. "Ever since we talked to Uncle Samuel." Thad's jaw tightened. "What did that bastard say to you?" Ilera finally found her voice. He offered to help, but there's a condition." The words felt like stones in her mouth. "He wants me to marry his business associate, a man named Cornelius Blackwell. If I agree, he'll pay off our debts. If I refuse," she trailed off, the implications clear enough. Thad was quiet for a long moment, his hands curling into fists at his sides. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled, like he was holding back rage. "How old is this Cornelius?" Ilera wiped at her eyes. 47. Thad cursed under his breath. "And you're, what, 19? 20. 19, Ilera confirmed. Thad shook his head in disgust. "That's not help. That's buying you. That's turning you into property to pay off a debt that ain't even yours." His words echoed her own thoughts so precisely that Ilera felt something loosen in her chest. "But I don't have another choice," she said desperately. "I owe $300 to bank. The homestead will be foreclosed in 2 weeks if I don't pay." And then Micah and I, she couldn't finish the sentence. Thad studied her face for a long moment, then seemed to come to some kind of decision. How much you got in savings? Ilera blinked at the sudden question. $8. Maybe 9. Thad nodded slowly. All right, here's what I'm thinking. The Triple Bar Ranch where I work, we're always needing help. Kitchen work, laundry, mending, garden work. Boss's wife, Mrs. Fletcher, she's been complaining about being short-handed for months. Job pays $30 a month plus room and board. You'd have a cabin to yourself. Food provided, and Micah could help with light chores. He paused, meeting her eyes. It ain't glamorous. It's hard work, but it's honest and it's yours. You'd earn enough to save, maybe get back on your feet, definitely enough to start paying down your debt. Ilera's heart leaped with hope before reality crashed back down. $30 a month means it would take me 10 months to save $300. The bank won't wait that long. Thad held up a hand. That's where the second part comes in. I got money saved, about $200. Been saving for years to buy my own land someday. I'll loan it to you, interest-free. You take my $200, add your 9, that's $209. You'd need 91 more. Work at the ranch for 3 months, that's $90. By the time the bank comes calling, you'll have almost enough. I'll spot you the last dollar if needed. Ilera stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. Why would you do this? You don't even know me. Thad smiled, a gentle curve of his lips that made something warm bloom in Ilera's chest. Maybe I want to, he said simply. Maybe I think you deserve a chance to build your own life instead of being sold into someone else's. That night, Ilera lay awake in the small boarding house room, staring at the ceiling and turning over both offers in her mind. On one side, marriage to Cornelius Blackwell, immediate solution, no debt, security for Micah, but also giving herself to a stranger, becoming someone's possession, sacrificing any hope of choosing her own future. On the other side, Thaddeus Cole's offer, hard work, slow progress, the dignity of earning her own way, but also taking money from a man she barely knew, gambling on her ability to pay him back, risking everything if she failed. And underneath both options ran a current of attraction she didn't want to acknowledge, a awareness of Thad that had nothing to do with his money and everything to do with the way he looked at her like she mattered, like she was worth defending, like she was more than just a problem to be solved. She must have fallen asleep eventually, because she woke to sunlight streaming to the window and Micah shaking her shoulder. Ilera, someone's knocking. She sat up groggily and opened the door to find Rosa standing there with a worried expression. Senor Whitmore sent me, the older woman said. He wants your answer by noon today. He moved up his deadline. Of course he did. Samuel was applying pressure, making sure she didn't have time to think or plan or find alternatives. Ilera felt anger surge through her exhaustion. Tell him I'll come by at noon, she said. Rosa hesitated, then leaned in close and whispered, Whatever you decide, Nina, be careful. Cornelius Blackwell is not a good man. I have heard things, she trailed off, glancing nervously down the hall. Just be careful. After Rosa left, Ilera dressed carefully in her borrowed brown dress and braided her hair. She felt like she was preparing for battle, putting on armor made of determination and desperation. She fed Micah the last of the bread Rosa had brought them, then took his hand and walked through the morning streets toward the Whitmore Cattle Company building. But instead of going inside, she walked past it, her feet carrying her to the edge of town where the Triple Bar Ranch crew kept their horses. She found Thad there, already working despite the early hour, currying the chestnut mare with long, patient strokes. When he saw her, he straightened immediately, reading something in her expression that made him set aside the curry brush and give her his full attention. You decided, he said. It wasn't a question. I need to ask you something first, Ilera said, her voice steady despite her hammering heart. Why are you really doing this? And please don't say it's just because you think I deserve a chance. People don't give away their life savings for strangers out of pure goodness. There's always a reason. Thad was quiet for a moment, considering her question with the seriousness it deserved. Then he said, You're right, there is a reason. He met her eyes, My mother worked herself to death to try to keep 5 boys fed after my father died. She took in laundry, cleaned houses, did anything that would bring in a few cents. I was too young to help much, and I watched her fade away a little more every day. When she died, I was 15 and on my own, and I swore if I ever had the chance to help someone in a similar situation, I would. So that's part of it. He paused. But I'd be lying if I said that was the whole truth. What's the rest? Ilera asked, holding her breath. Thad looked away, toward the distant mountains painted gold by morning sun, then back at her. The rest is that when I saw you standing in that doorway last night, with everyone laughing at you, and you didn't run or cry or beg, you just stood there with your head up and your brother's hand in yours, I thought, there's someone worth knowing. And then when you spoke to your uncle with dignity, even while he treated you like trash, I thought, there's someone worth fighting for. I know it don't make sense. I know we just met. But sometimes you see something in a person that makes you want to be part of their story. That's what I saw in you. His honesty was devastating in its simplicity. No flowery words, no empty promises. Just raw truth offered up like a gift. Ilera felt tears threatening again, but this time they were different tears. Gratitude mixed with something else. Something that felt dangerously like hope. If I take your money, she said carefully, I'll pay back every penny. With interest, even if you don't want it. I'll work as hard as you've ever seen anyone work. I'll prove I'm worth the risk. Thad smiled. I already know you're worth the risk, but I appreciate you saying it. He extended his hand. So, is that a yes? You'll take the job at Triple Bar. Ilera looked at his hand, callous and scarred and honest, then placed hers in it. His grip was warm and firm and made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could survive this after all. Yes, she said. It's a yes. Thad's smile widened into something brilliant, and Ilera realized with start that he was actually handsome when he smiled like that, all the hard edges softening into something open and genuine. All right then, Thad said, already moving into action. First thing we do is go see Mr. Fletcher, get you officially hired. Then we ride into town to the bank. Pay off your debt before your uncle can pull any tricks. Then we send word to the homestead that you're keeping the land and they can back off. How's that sound? It sounded like a miracle. It sounded like freedom. It sounded terrifying and exhilarating and more than she dared to hope for 24 hours ago. It sounds perfect, Ilera said. But what about my uncle? I was supposed to give him my answer at noon. Thad's expression hardened. Let him wait. Better yet, let's go there first. Let you tell him face to face that you don't need his help after all. I'd pay good money to see his face when you walk away from his devil's bargain. The idea filled Ilera with a fierce satisfaction. Yes, she wanted Samuel to know she'd found another way. She wanted him to see that she wasn't as desperate or as powerless as he thought. She wanted to reclaim some of the dignity he'd tried to strip from her. They walked together toward the Whitmore building, Micah between them. And for the first time since her parents died, Ilera felt like she wasn't facing the world alone. When they reached Samuel's office, the secretary tried to stop them, but Thad just politely stepped around her and opened the door. Samuel looked up from his desk, irritation flashing across his face when he saw them. Ilera, you're early, and you brought company. He said the last word with clear distaste, eyeing Thad like he was something unpleasant tracked in on someone's boot. Ilera stood straight, shoulders back, and said clearly, I came to give you my answer, Uncle Samuel. I won't be marrying Mr. Blackwell. I found other employment and another way to handle my debts. Thank you for your offer, but I don't need your help after all. The silence that followed was glorious. Samuel's face went through several colors, surprise and anger, then something that looked almost like grudging respect before settling back into cold contempt. Other employment? He repeated. Let me guess. This cowboy convinced you he's your savior? He laughed harshly. You're making a mistake. Ilera, cowboys are drifters. They'll promise you the moon and disappear with the sunrise. In 6 months, you'll be right back where you started, only worse off because you'll have wasted time you didn't have. Thad stepped forward. I'll still be here in 6 months, he said quietly. And in 6 years. and I'll be treating your niece with the respect you should have shown her from the start." Samuel's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Get out of my office, both of you, and don't come crawling back when your little plan falls apart. This offer was one time only." Elara nodded. "I understand. Goodbye, Uncle Samuel." She turned and walked out, Thad and Micah following, and didn't look back even once. The Triple Bar Ranch spread across 5,000 acres of some of the best grazing land in the territory. The main house was a sprawling structure of adobe and timber, surrounded by corrals, bunkhouses, barns, and various outbuildings that spoke of prosperity earned through hard work rather than inheritance. Mr. Fletcher was a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and hands that had spent decades working cattle. His wife, Margaret Fletcher, was a small, energetic woman with graying hair and a warm smile that made Elara feel welcome before a single word was spoken. When Thad explained the situation, carefully editing out the more humiliating details, Mrs. Fletcher had immediately taken Alara's hand in hers and said, "Oh, honey, we're so glad to have you. I've been drowning in work for months. Can you cook? So? Garden?" Elara had nodded to all three, and Mrs. Fletcher had beamed. The cabin they showed her was small but sturdy, with 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, and real glass windows. It sat at the edge of the ranch compound, close enough to the main house for safety, but far enough for privacy. Micah had run inside immediately, marveling at the beds with actual mattresses and blankets, the table and chairs, the shelf where they could put their few belongings. "We live here?" he'd asked, his eyes wide. "Really?" Elara had felt her throat tighten as she nodded. This was more than she'd had in 6 months. This was a home. Mrs. Fletcher had stocked the cabin with basic supplies: flour, salt, beans, coffee, and promised that Elara could take meals with the ranch hands if she preferred, or cook for herself and Micah if she wanted privacy. "Whatever feels right to you, dear. You're part of our family now." The work started the next morning. Elara woke before dawn and reported to the main house kitchen, where Mrs. Fletcher put her to work preparing breakfast for 20 ranch hands: eggs, bacon, biscuits, gravy, and endless pots of coffee. It was hot, exhausting work, but Elara found a rhythm in it, a satisfaction in the physical labor that left no room for worry or fear. After breakfast was cleaned up, Mrs. Fletcher set her mending. There were torn shirts and pants that needed patching, buttons that needed replacing, holes that needed darning. Elara's fingers flew through the work, muscle memory from years of mending her family's clothes guiding her stitches. At lunch, she helped serve beef stew and cornbread to the hungry workers, and she noticed that among them, sitting at the far end of the table but watching her with quiet approval in his eyes. The afternoon brought laundry, sheets and towels and work clothes that needed washing, wringing, and hanging to dry in the hot sun. Elara's arms ached by the time she finished, but it was a good ache, the kind that came from honest work honestly paid for. Micah helped where he could, carrying small items, fetching water, entertaining the ranch dogs who followed him everywhere. The other workers were kind to him, teaching him to whistle and showing him how to curry horses and pointing out where the barn cats kept their kittens. By evening, when Elara finally stumbled back to their cabin, she was exhausted but satisfied. She'd earned this day. She'd proven her worth. And tomorrow she'd do it again. This was survival on her own terms, and it felt like victory. As the days turned into weeks, Elara settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She learned the names of all the workers, not just Thad, but also Miguel the horsebreaker, old Tom who told stories by the fire, young Billy who was barely older than Elara herself, and a dozen others who became familiar faces in her daily routine. She learned that Mrs. Fletcher loved roses and hated rats, that Mr. Fletcher had a soft spot for stray animals, that the cook's helper Sally was saving money to visit her sister in California. She learned which cowboys liked their coffee strong enough to strip paint, and which ones preferred extra sugar. She learned the sounds of the ranch: cattle calling at dawn, horses nickering for their feed, the ring of the blacksmith's hammer, the creak of windmills pumping water from deep wells. And she learned that Thaddeus Cole was even better than his word. He'd ridden into town the day after she accepted the job and arranged everything with the bank, paying $200 toward her debt, setting up a payment plan for the remainder, ensuring the homestead wouldn't be touched for at least a year. He'd done it quietly, without fanfare or expectation of gratitude, just handling it like it was the most natural thing in the world to loan a stranger his life savings. When Alara had tried to thank him, he just shrugged and said, "That's what the money was for, helping someone who needed it. Can't think of a better use." But Alara could see the sacrifice in that gesture, the dream of his own land deferred, maybe for years, because he'd chosen to help her instead. It made her determined to pay him back as quickly as possible, but it also made her feel something else. Something warm and confusing and dangerous that grew a little stronger every time he smiled at her or checked to make sure she and Micah were settling in all right. 2 months into her employment at Triple Bar, autumn arrived with a vengeance. The temperatures dropped and dark clouds rolled in from the west, bringing the kind of storm that could destroy crops and flood arroyos and turn trails into rivers of mud. Mr. Fletcher ordered everyone to secure the livestock and batten down anything that could blow away. Alara worked alongside the other hands, helping to move horses into the barn and reinforce fence posts and carry supplies into the main house. The wind picked up as they worked, howling through the valley like something alive and angry, tearing at clothes and hair and whipping dust into everyone's eyes. By the time the first raindrops fell, fat and heavy and cold, Alara was soaked with sweat and exhausted from effort. Mrs. Fletcher called her into the main house, insisting she wait out the worst of the storm there, rather than trying to make it back to her cabin. The rain came down in sheets, turning the world outside the windows into a gray blur. Lightning cracked across the sky, close enough that Alara could feel the thunder in her bones. Micah pressed against her side, frightened by the violence of the storm, and she wrapped an arm around him while Mrs. Fletcher brought them hot coffee and blankets. "Don't you worry," the older woman said kindly. "This house has weathered 50 years of storms. We're safe as can be." But as the hours wore on and the rain showed no signs of stopping, Mr. Fletcher's expression grew increasingly concerned. He stood at the window, watching the water rise in the creek that ran through property. "If it keeps up like this," he said quietly to his wife, "we're going to have flooding. The lower pastures will be underwater by morning." That's when someone hammered on the door, and Miguel burst in, water streaming from his hat and jacket. "Boss, we got a problem." The herd in the south pasture. They're spooked by the lightning and they're running, heading straight for the gulch. If they go over the edge in the storm, he didn't need to finish. Everyone knew what happened to cattle that stampeded over a cliff in the dark. Mr. Fletcher was already grabbing his coat and rifle. "How many men we got?" Miguel counted quickly. 5 in the bunkhouse, plus me. Young Billy's out checking the north fence line. Don't know if he made it back yet. Mr. Fletcher swore. 6 men to turn a stampeding herd. It's not enough, but it'll have to do. He looked at his wife. "Margaret, you keep everyone safe here. I'll be back when I can." But before he could leave, Thad appeared in the doorway, as soaked as Miguel and breathing hard. "Boss, I was checking the supply shed and saw the herd moving. I already sent Tom to try to head them off from the east, but we're going to need everyone who can ride." His eyes swept the room and landed on Alara. She saw the question in them before he asked it. "Can you ride?" Alara stood up, her heart pounding. "Not well, but I can learn fast." Thad hesitated, clearly torn between needing the help and not wanting to put her in danger. But Mr. Fletcher made the decision for them. "If she's willing, we need her. Every hand counts." He looked at Alara seriously. "It's dangerous work, miss. Cattle in a stampede can kill you if you get in their way. But if we don't turn them, we'll lose half the herd, and that'll mean no wages come winter. Your choice." Alara thought of the money she owed Thad, the safety of her job here, the future she was building for Micah. She thought of her parents, who'd never backed down from hard work or danger when it needed doing. She looked at Mrs. Fletcher. "Can you watch Micah?" The older woman nodded immediately. "Of course, dear. I'll keep him safe." Alara turned back to Mr. Fletcher. "Then I'll help." Thad's expression shifted through several emotions: protest, admiration, fear, resignation, before settling on grim determination. "All right, but you stick close to me, understand? You do exactly what I say. When I say it, no arguments." Alara nodded. Within minutes, They were mounted and riding into the storm, rain lashing their faces, and lightning turning the world into stark flashes of white and black. Ilara clung to the horse Thad had given her, a steady gray mare named Silver, and prayed she wouldn't fall off or get someone killed with her inexperience. The ride to the south pasture was a nightmare of mud and wind and near-zero visibility. Ilara could barely see Thad riding ahead of her, could only follow the shape of his horse and trust that he knew where they were going. Then she heard it. The thunder of hundreds of hooves, the terrified lowing of cattle in full panic. They crested a rise and she saw them, a dark mass of animals running flat out through the rain, heading straight for a gulch that dropped away into nothing. If they went over that edge, it would be a slaughter. Mr. Fletcher was shouting orders, but the wind tore his words away. Thad turned in his saddle and gestured for Ilara to follow, then spurred his horse forward, riding hard to get ahead of the stampede. Ilara kicked Silver, and the mare leaped forward, racing through the storm with sure feet, while Ilara held on for dear life. What happened next was a blur of action and terror. The cowboys spread out, trying to turn the herd away from the gulch. Firing guns in the air and waving torches they'd somehow kept lit despite the rain. Ilara did what Thad had taught her in those frantic seconds before they'd left. She rode parallel to the herd, shouting and waving her arms, adding her presence to the wall of noise and motion that was trying to redirect all that panic momentum. It seemed impossible. The cattle were too scared, too committed to their path. But then something shifted. The lead animal began to turn, following the pressure of the riders, and slowly, so slowly, the whole herd began to curve away from the cliff. It took another hour of hard riding in the storm. But finally, the cattle slowed and stopped, bunched together and confused, exhausted mass in a safer pasture. Ilara sat on Silver, gasping for breath, her whole body shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. Thad appeared beside her, his face streaked with mud and worry. "You all right?" he shouted over the rain. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Thad reached over and squeezed her hand briefly, a gesture of relief and pride, and something else that made her heart stutter despite the cold and wet and terror of the past hours. Around them, the other cowboys were whooping and congratulating each other, their voices hoarse but triumphant. They'd done it. They'd saved the herd. And Ilara had been part of it. She'd proven herself not just as a kitchen worker or a seamstress, but as someone who could be counted on when things got desperate. Someone who belonged. As they rode back to the ranch through the slowly easing storm, Ilara felt something fundamental shift inside her. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and it felt like flying. 3 months after starting work at Triple Bar Ranch, Ilara had saved $93. Combined with what Thad had loaned her and the small amount she'd started with, she now had exactly $302. Enough to pay off the bank completely with $2 left over. The knowledge filled her with a satisfaction, so deep it almost hurt. She'd done it, through hard work and determination, and help from people who believed in her. She'd pulled herself and Micah back from the edge of disaster. The homestead was safe. Their parents' graves would remain undisturbed. And more than that, she'd built something new here at Triple Bar, a life that felt like it might actually have a future. Mrs. Fletcher had started teaching her to read better, working through newspapers and books in the evenings. Micah had grown stronger and healthier, his cheeks filling out from regular meals and his laughter coming easier. And Thad had become something she tried not to think about too much, because thinking about him made her feel things that seemed dangerous and wonderful in equal measure. She decided to pay him back on a Sunday afternoon when most of the ranch hands had ridden into town. She found him in the barn, repairing a saddle by the light filtering through the high windows. He looked up when she approached, and that familiar smile curved his lips, the one that made her feel like she was the only person in the world worth looking at. "Hey," he said, setting aside his work. "Thought you had the afternoon off?" Ilara nodded. "I do, but I needed to talk to you." She pulled the small leather pouch from her pocket, feeling its weight like both a burden and a triumph. "I have your money. All of it. $200, plus 10% interest like we agreed." She held out to him, her hand steady despite her racing heart. Thad looked at the pouch but didn't reach for it. His expression shifted into something complicated. pleased and sad and conflicted all at once. Already, he said, it's only been 3 months. Ilera lifted her chin. I worked hard, saved every penny I could. Mrs. Fletcher gave me extra work when she had it, and I sold some of my sewing to women in town. I told you I'd pay you back with interest, and I meant it. Thad was quiet for a long moment, still not taking the money. Finally, he said, what if I don't want to take it? Ilera blinked, confused. What do you mean? We had an agreement. I owe you this money. Thad stood up, moving closer to her, his eyes serious. The agreement was a loan. But what if I want to change the terms? Ilera's heart began to hammer. Change them how? Thad reached out slowly and closed her hand around the pouch, pushing it gently back toward her. Keep it, he said. Use it for something you need. A better dress, or books for Micah, or savings for emergencies. Consider the debt paid in full. I can't do that, Ilera protested. This is your money, your savings, your dream of buying land. Thad smiled, but there was something vulnerable in it now, something that made him look younger and more uncertain. My dream changed, he said quietly. Used to be I wanted land, a place of my own where I could build something and not have to drift anymore. But then I met you, and now... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. Now I think maybe the dream isn't about the land. Maybe it's about the person you build with. Maybe having someone to come home to is worth more than having acres to your name. The air between them felt charged with possibility, with words hovering unsaid but understood. Ilera's breath caught. Thad, what are you saying? He took the pouch from her hand and set it carefully on the workbench, then took both her hands in his. I'm saying I'm in love with you, Ilera Whitmore. I've been in love with you since that first night when you stood in that doorway and refused to be broken by people who wanted to see you fail. I'm saying that when I gave you that money, part of me hoped it would give you a reason to stay close long enough for me to prove I'm worth taking a chance on. I'm saying that watching you work yourself to bone these past 3 months, seeing you be strong and brave and kind and determined, has only made me love you more. His voice was rough with emotion. And I'm saying that if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, I'd like to court you proper, take you to dances in town, bring you flowers, ask your permission to kiss you instead of just thinking about it every damn day. Ilera felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were good tears, happy tears, tears that tasted like hope instead of despair. You want to court me, she whispered. Even knowing where I came from, even knowing I'm poor and uneducated and come with a 6-year-old brother who needs raising. Thad's smile widened into something beautiful, especially knowing all that, because it means you understand what matters and what doesn't. Means you know the value of things that can't be bought or sold. Means you're exactly the kind of woman I want beside me for the rest of my life. He paused, his thumb stroking gentle circles on the backs of her hands. So what do you say? Can I court you? Can I try to earn the honor of being someone you might someday love back? Ilera didn't trust her voice, so instead she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest and feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her cheek. Thad's arms came around her immediately, holding her like she was something precious and fragile and worth protecting. They stood like that for a long moment, just breathing together, while dust motes danced in the sunlight and horses nickered softly in their stalls. Finally, Ilera pulled back just enough to look up at him. You don't have to earn anything, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You already did that months ago when you stood up for me in a room full of people who wanted to see me fail. When you believed I was worth fighting for before I even believed it myself. So, yes, you can court me. Yes, I want flowers and dances and proper kisses. And yes, she took a shaky breath. Yes, I love you too. Maybe I've loved you since that first night. I was just too scared to admit it. Thad's eyes shone with something that might have been tears, but he blinked them away and smiled instead. Can I kiss you now, he asked. Or do I need to wait for proper courting protocols? Ilera laughed. Actually laughed for the first time in what felt like years. I think protocols can wait, she said, rising up on her toes. Thad met her halfway, his lips gentle and careful on hers, like he was memorizing the moment, like he wanted to make sure she knew how much this meant to him. The kiss was sweet and tender and full of promise, and when they finally broke apart, Ilara felt like the world had shifted into something brighter, something full of possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. She'd come to Redemption Creek, expecting to beg for scraps and leave with her dignity in pieces. Instead, she found work that gave her purpose, a home that felt safe, and a love that saw her for exactly who she was and chose her anyway. It felt like a miracle. It felt like justice. It felt like the beginning of something worth fighting for. 6 weeks later, Thad made good on his promise and took Ilara to a dance in Redemption Creek. Mrs. Fletcher had insisted on lending her a proper dress, a beautiful deep burgundy with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, and had helped arrange her hair in a style that made Ilara barely recognize herself in the mirror. She looked like a lady. Not poor, not desperate, not someone to be mocked or pitted. Just a young woman preparing for an evening with a man who cared about her. Micah had been thrilled to stay behind with Mr. Fletcher, who'd promised to teach him card tricks and let him help feed the horses. As Thad helped Ilara into the wagon for the ride to town, his eyes had gone wide with appreciation. "You look beautiful," he'd said simply, and the sincerity in his voice had made her cheeks warm with pleasure. The dance was being held at the same Silver Spur saloon where Ilara had first been humiliated months ago. As they approached, she felt her old anxiety rising. What if people remembered her ragged dress? What if they whispered and pointed? What if she didn't belong here any more now than she had then? But Thad seemed to sense her fear. He took her hand and squeezed it gently. "You walk in there with your head high," he said. "You've got nothing to be ashamed of. You earned your place here through hard work and courage. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth your attention." His words steadied her, and when they walked through those doors together, Ilara kept her chin up and her shoulders back. The room was crowded with people she recognized from that terrible first night. The woman in the emerald dress, the man in the expensive suit, the preening socialites who'd found her poverty so entertaining. But this time, something was different. This time, when eyes turned toward her, she saw surprise instead of mockery, curiosity instead of contempt. Several women whispered behind their fans, but the whispers had a different quality now, speculation rather than judgment. A few people nodded politely in her direction, and when Thad led her to the dance floor and pulled her into a waltz, she saw the woman in the emerald dress watching them with something that looked almost like envy. Ilara realized with sudden clarity that she'd changed. She wasn't the desperate girl who'd walked in here begging for help. She was someone who'd fought for her own survival and won, and that transformation was written in every confident step she took, every smile she gave Thad, every moment she claimed this space as somewhere she had a right to be. Halfway through the evening, Uncle Samuel appeared. Ilara saw him across the room, deep in conversation with a group of other wealthy cattle ranchers, his expression sour as always. For a moment, their eyes met, and Ilara saw him taking her transformation. The nice dress, the man at her side, the confidence in her bearing. Samuel's face hardened with something that might have been regret or might have been anger that she'd succeeded without him. He started to move in their direction, but before he could reach them, Thad steered Ilara smoothly away, spinning her into another dance. "Let's not waste our evening on men like that," he murmured in her ear. Ilara nodded gratefully. She had no interest in confronting her uncle. His opinion no longer mattered. She'd proven everything she needed to prove, to him, to the town, but most importantly, to herself. As the night wore on, something unexpected happened. Women began approaching Ilara, asking to be introduced, inquire about her work at Triple Bar, complimenting her dress and hair. Some were genuinely kind, drawn by the story they'd heard of the poor girl who turned her life around. Others were curious in a more calculating way, sizing her up as potential competition or alliance, but all of them treated her with basic respect, and that felt like victory enough. One woman, Sarah Chun, who ran the laundry in town, pulled Ilara aside and said quietly, "I remember you from that first night, when they were all laughing. I wanted to say something, but She trailed off, shame coloring her cheeks. "I was a coward, but I'm glad you found your way. You give hope to the rest of us who feel trapped." Her words struck something deep in Ilara's chest. She hadn't thought about it before, But maybe her story mattered beyond just her own survival. Maybe it showed other women that they didn't have to accept the limitations the world tried to place on them. The evening ended with Thad walking Alara outside to watch the stars. The night air was cool and clear, and the music from inside drifted out through the open windows like something from a dream. Thad pulled her close, and they swayed together without music, just the rhythm of their own breathing and heartbeats. "Thank you," Alara whispered, "for bringing me here, for helping me see that I'm not that scared girl anymore." Thad pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You were never that scared girl. You were always strong. You just needed the chance to prove it." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other in the night, while inside the saloon people danced and laughed and lived their lives, and Alara felt herself fully becoming part of that world instead of watching from its edges. She walked through fire to get here, but she'd emerged whole on the other side. And now, with Thad's arms around her and her future spreading out like the star-filled sky above, she finally believed that she deserved all the good things that were coming. She'd earned them, every single one. The winter months passed in a rhythm of work and quiet joy. Alara continued her duties at Triple Bar, her skills improving until Mrs. Fletcher trusted her to manage the kitchen entirely on her own when needed. Micah thrived in the ranch environment, growing taller and stronger, his vocabulary expanding as Mr. Fletcher taught him to read from old newspapers and books. And Thad courted Alara with patient dedication. Stolen kisses in the barn, long walks through the winter landscape, evenings spent sitting by the fire in her cabin talking about everything and nothing. They were building something real and solid. Foundations laid carefully like you'd build a house meant to last generations. Alara had never been happier, and that terrified her sometimes because she'd learned that happiness could be ripped away in an instant. Then one February morning, a letter arrived addressed to Miss Alara Whitmore. It came from the bank in Redemption Creek, and Alara's hand shook as she opened it, fearing the worst. Some forgotten debt, some legal complication, some new disaster to destroy the peace she'd fought so hard to claim. But the letter wasn't a threat. It was an opportunity. The bank president, Mr. William Crane, wrote that he'd been impressed by her diligence in paying off her father's debt. He'd heard about her work at Triple Bar Ranch and her reputation for reliability and hard work. He was writing to inform her that there was a teaching position available at the Redemption Creek schoolhouse. The previous teacher had moved east to get married, leaving mid-year. The job paid $45 a month, more than she was making at the ranch, and came with a small house behind the school where she and Micah could live. Alara read the letter 3 times, unable to believe what she was seeing. A teaching position, $45 a month, a house of their own. It was more than she'd ever dreamed possible, especially considering she'd only completed 6th grade herself before her family had left Missouri. But Mr. Crane's letter explained that the territorial standards for teachers were flexible. What mattered was basic literacy, numeracy, and a willingness to work hard. The town was small, and the students were few, mostly children of ranchers and farmers who needed someone patient and kind more than they needed someone with fancy credentials. Mr. Crane wanted to interview her the following week. He'd heard about her story. The girl who'd walked into town in a ragged dress and pulled herself up through sheer determination, and thought she'd be a perfect role model for the children. Would she be interested? Alara sat with the letter for a long time, her mind churning with possibilities and fears. This was everything she'd never dared to hope for. Respect, good wages, a chance to do meaningful work that mattered. But it also meant leaving Triple Bar, leaving Mrs. Fletcher, who'd become like a mother to her, leaving the routine she'd come to depend on, and most complicated of all, leaving the daily proximity to Thad. If she moved into town, she'd only see him on weekends when he could ride in. Would their relationship survive the distance? Would he resent her for choosing the opportunity over staying close? Or would he understand that she needed to grab this chance while it was offered, that women like her didn't get many opportunities and had to take the ones that came? She needed to talk to him, but fear made her hesitate. What if he asked her to stay? What if she had to choose between love and independence? That evening, she found him in the barn as usual, and before she could lose her courage, she handed him the letter. He read it slowly, his expression unreadable, and when he finished, he was quiet for so long that Alara's heart began to sink. Finally, He looked up at her and said, "You'd be a wonderful teacher." His voice was steady, but she could hear the strain underneath. "Those kids would be lucky to have you." Elara swallowed hard. "But it means moving to town. It means we wouldn't see each other every day." Thad nodded slowly. "I know." Another long pause. "Are you going to take it?" It was the question that mattered, the one that would determine everything that came next. And Elara realized she already knew her answer. She'd known from the moment she'd read the letter. "Yes," she said, her voice firm despite the tears threatening. "I have to take it. For Micah, so he can go to school properly. For me, so I can be something more than just someone who cleans and cooks. I have to try. Thad, I have to see if I can do this." Thad set the letter down and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She felt his heart hammering beneath her cheek, and for a moment, she thought he might ask her to stay, might make her choose. But when he finally spoke, his voice was rough but certain. "Then you take it," he said. "You take that job and you teach those kids, and you build the life you deserve. I'm not going to stand in the way of your dreams. Elara, I love you too much for that." Elara pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face now. "But what about us? What about what we're building here?" Thad cupped her face gently, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "We'll figure it out. I'll ride into town every chance I get. You'll come back to visit on Sundays. We'll write letters. We'll make it work, because what we have is worth the effort." "You're not angry?" Elara asked, needing to be sure. "You don't think I'm choosing the job over you?" Thad smiled, that beautiful smile that had first made her heart stutter months ago. "I think you're choosing yourself, your future, your worth, and I'm proud of you for it. Besides," he added, his smile turning a bit mischievous, "a teacher makes better wages than a ranch hand. Maybe I should be worried you'll find someone more suitable now that you're moving up in the world." Elara laughed through her tears and hit his chest lightly. "Don't be ridiculous. I don't want someone suitable. I want you." Thad caught her hand and brought it to his lips. "Good, because you're stuck with me, teacher or not. I'm not letting you go that easy." They stood together in the barn while the winter wind howled outside and the horses shifted in their stalls, holding each other like they could somehow store up enough closeness to last through the coming separation. The next week, Elara rode into town with Mr. Fletcher for an interview with Mr. Crane. The bank president was a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and a kind face lined with years of seeing the best and worst of human nature. He interviewed her in his office, asking about her education, her family, her work at Triple Bar. Elara answered honestly, neither embellishing nor minimizing her experiences. When he asked why she thought she could teach despite her limited formal education, she said simply, "Because I know what it's like to struggle. I know what it's like to need someone to believe in you when the world says you're not worth the effort. Those children need someone who sees their potential, not just their circumstances. I can be that person because I've lived that struggle myself." Mr. Crane studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're hired, Miss Whitmore. The position is yours if you want it. You can start the first Monday in March. That gives you 3 weeks to prepare and move into the schoolhouse." Elara felt her heart soar. "Thank you," she managed to say past a lump in her throat. "Thank you so much. I won't let you down." Mr. Crane smiled. "I don't believe you will. And Miss Whitmore, what you've accomplished in the past few months, paying off your debts, making a life for yourself and your brother, that took courage and determination. This town could use more people like you. Welcome to Redemption Creek." As Elara walked out of the bank into the bright winter sunshine, she felt like she was walking into a whole new life. Everything she'd survived, every humiliation she'd endured, every moment of doubt and fear and desperate hope, it had all led to this. She was going to be a teacher. She was going to matter. And somehow, impossibly, she was going to keep the love of the good man while building her own future. It seemed too good to be true, and part of her waited for the other shoe to drop. But maybe, just maybe, she'd finally earned the right to have good things without them being taken away. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of Redemption Creek, A simple one-room building with whitewashed walls and a bell tower that could be heard across the valley when the wind was right. Behind it stood the teacher's cottage, small but charming, with 2 rooms, a fireplace, and a tiny kitchen that felt like a palace compared to the homestead cabin Alara had grown up in. The previous teacher had left it clean and well-maintained, with books lining shelves and maps on the walls, and a writing slate that still held faint traces of mathematical equations. Alara moved in with the help of Thad and several ranch hands from Triple Bar, carrying her few belongings and Micah's treasures in a small collection of things she'd accumulated over the past months. Mrs. Fletcher had cried when saying goodbye, pressing a beautiful quilt into Alara's hands and making her promise to visit often. The first day of school arrived too quickly and not quickly enough. Alara woke before dawn, her stomach churning with nerves, and spent an hour preparing herself, checking her lesson plans, arranging the classroom, writing the day's schedule on the board. When the children began arriving, she stood at the door to greet each one, learning their names and try and project confidence she didn't entirely feel. There were 14 students ranging from 6 to 15 years old, children of ranchers and shopkeepers and laborers, all with different levels of education and vastly different needs. Some could barely read. Others were nearly as educated as Alara herself. But all of them looked at her with curiosity and varying degrees of skepticism, wondering if this young woman, only a few years older than some of them, could really teach them anything worth knowing. Alara started the day by telling them her story. Not all of it. She left out the worst parts, the deepest humiliations, but enough that they understood she'd been where they were. Poor, struggling, uncertain of her future. "I know what it's like to feel like you don't matter," she told them, her voice steady and clear. "I know what it's like when people look at you and see only your circumstances instead of your potential. But I also know that education is the one thing nobody can take from you once you have it. Knowledge makes you powerful. It gives you choices. And that's what I want to give you. The tools to choose your own future instead of having it chosen for you." She saw several children sit up straighter, saw interest flicker in eyes that had been dull with resignation. That first small victory gave her courage to continue. The days fell into a rhythm. Mathematics in the morning, reading after lunch, history and geography in the afternoon. Alara discovered she had a natural gift for teaching. Patience to explain concepts multiple times in different ways, creativity to make dry material interesting, and genuine care for each child's progress. She stayed late helping students who struggled, sent home books for those who wanted to learn more, and praised every small achievement like it was something extraordinary, because to these children it was. Many of them came from families where education was considered a luxury rather than necessity, where working the ranch or helping the store was more important than learning history or literature. Alara was fighting against that mindset every day, trying to show parents that investing in their children's minds was investing in their futures. Thad kept his promise and rode into town every Saturday, spending his day off with Alara and Micah. They walked through town together, eat lunch at the boarding house, and spend the afternoon talking about their weeks, her stories of stubborn students and small victories, his stories of broken horses and ranch drama. On Sunday mornings, before riding back to Triple Bar, Thad would help Alara prepare lessons for the coming week, reading through textbooks and suggesting ways to explain difficult concepts. He never made her feel guilty for taking the teaching position, never suggested she should have stayed at the ranch, never let their relationship become a burden she had to carry on top of her other responsibilities. Instead, he became her partner in a different way, supported her dreams even when it meant sacrifice for him, and Alara loved him more for it with each passing week. 2 months into her teaching position, something remarkable happened. One of her students, a 13-year-old girl named Emma, whose father had initially protested sending her to school at all, won a territorial writing competition with an essay about women's education. The prize was a scholarship to a girls' academy in Tucson, and Emma's father, proud and bewildered in equal measure, agreed to let her go. At the award ceremony in town, Emma stood in front of everyone and said, "I want to thank my teacher, Miss Whitmore, who taught me that being poor doesn't mean being stupid, and being a girl doesn't mean being less than. She showed me I could be more than what people expected." Alara had cried right there in front of the whole town, not caring who saw, because in that moment, she knew her work mattered. She was changing lives, giving children hope and tools and possibilities they might never have had otherwise. And it felt like the most important thing she'd ever done. More important than survival, more important than paying debts or earning wages. This was purpose. This was meaning. This was the life she'd been fighting for all along, without even knowing it. Spring arrived in Arizona territory with wildflowers carpeting the desert and warm winds carrying the scent of creosote and sage. Ilera had been teaching for 4 months now, and her reputation had grown beyond Redemption Creek. Parents from neighboring towns were asking about enrollment. The territorial superintendent had visited and praised her innovative methods, and Mr. Crane had mentioned the possibility of expanding the school to 2 rooms with a second teacher under Ilera's supervision. She'd saved nearly $200 from her wages, more money than she'd ever had in her life, and had started making plans. Plans to properly furnish the cottage, plans to buy Micah better clothes and books, plans to maybe, someday, buy back her parent homestead and turn it into something beautiful, a memorial to their dreams that had died too soon. But underneath all those plans ran a deeper current. Thoughts of Thad that she tried to keep practical, but that kept drifting into dangerous territory. They'd been courting for almost 10 months now, and their relationship had deepened from that initial spark into something solid and true. She knew his habits and dreams, his fears and failures, the way he liked his coffee and the songs he hummed while working. He knew her just as well, her ambitions and insecurities, the nightmares that still sometimes woke her remembering her parents' death, the fierce protectiveness she felt for Micah. They fit together in a way that felt inevitable, like 2 pieces of a puzzle that had always been meant to connect. But Thad had never mentioned marriage, and Ilera tried not to think about why. Was it the distance between them? The difference in their positions now, that she was a respected teacher and he was still a ranch hand? Or did he simply not want that future with her? One Saturday in early May, Thad arrived in town earlier than usual, riding in just after dawn with a strange energy about him. Nervous but excited, like a man carrying a secret that was about to burst free. He took Ilera and Micah on a long ride out beyond the edge of town, to a beautiful stretch of land along Copper Creek, where cottonwoods grew thick and water ran clear even in the dry season. It was peaceful there, isolated, the kind of place that felt separate from the rest of the world. Thad helped Ilera down from her horse and suggested Micah go explore the creek. There were frogs and interesting rocks, plenty to keep a 7-year-old occupied. Once the boy was out of earshot, Thad took Ilera's hands and led her to a flat rock overlooking the water. "I need to tell you something," he started, and Ilera's heart began to race with equal parts hope and fear. "This land we're standing on, I bought it, 320 acres, including this whole stretch of creek. Bought it last week with the money I'd been saving, plus a loan from Mr. Fletcher." Ilera stared at him, shocked. "You bought land? But I thought you'd given up on that dream to help me." Thad shook his head. "Delayed it, not gave it up. And turns out Mr. Fletcher's been paying me more than standard wages for the past year. He calls it a reliability bonus, but really it was him helping me save faster. Says every good man deserves a chance to build something of his own." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "Thing is, I didn't just buy this land for me. I bought it for us. If you'll have me..." Ilera's breath caught. "Thad, what are you saying?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. Simple silver with a small blue stone that caught the morning light. "I'm saying I love you, Ilera Whitmore. I'm saying I've loved you since the moment you refused to let the world break you. I'm saying I want to build a life here on this land, raise cattle and horses, and maybe children if you want them, grow old watching sunsets from our porch. I'm saying I want you to be my wife, my partner, my equal in everything." He dropped to one knee on the sun-warmed rock, holding the ring up to her. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you?" Ilera felt tears streaming down her face, but these were the best kind of tears. Joy so pure hurt, happiness so complete it felt like her chest might burst. "Worthy of me?" she repeated, her voice breaking. "Thad, you saved my life. You gave me hope when I had nothing. You believed in me when nobody else did. You supported every dream I've ever had, even when it meant sacrifice for you. If anyone's worthy here, it's you. You're the finest man I've ever known." She dropped to her knees beside him, taking his face in her hands. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Yes to building a life together. Yes to everything. Thad's smile was brilliant as the sun, and he slipped the ring onto her finger. A perfect fit, like it had always been meant to be there. They kissed there on the rock with the creek singing below them and birds calling overhead, and Alara felt something settle in her soul. This was right. This was home. Not a place but a person, not security but partnership, not being saved but choosing to build something together. When they finally broke apart, Thad said, I've been thinking about the logistics. I know you love teaching, and I wouldn't ask you to give that up. The land is only 3 miles from town. You could ride in every morning, teach your classes, ride back in the evening. Or we could build a bigger house, and you could host students here sometimes. Start a little boarding school for kids from far-out ranches. Whatever you want, we'll make it work. His words proved what Alara had always known. He didn't want to cage her or limit her or make her smaller. He wanted to give her room to grow. What about children? Alara asked, needing to know his thoughts on everything. If we have babies, that would make teaching harder. Thad considered this seriously. Then we figure out together. Maybe you take some time off when they're tiny, or maybe we hire help, or maybe I take on more of the child rearing than most men do. I don't have all the answers. Alara, but I know we're both smart and stubborn enough to find solutions. He squeezed her hands. Besides, you're already raising Micah, and you're doing a damn fine job. Any children we have together will be lucky to have you as their mama. His faith in her was absolute, and it gave Alara the courage to believe in herself even more. They called Micah over and told him the news, and the boy whooped with joy and threw his arms around both of them. Does this mean Thad will be my brother? He asked excitedly. Alara laughed. Sort of. He'll be your brother-in-law, part of our family. Micah considered this and nodded seriously. Good. I like him. He teaches me good stuff. As they rode back to town that afternoon, Alara's ring catching the light with every movement of her hand. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that humiliating night in the saloon to this moment of perfect happiness. From desperation to hope to love, she'd earned every step of it through courage and hard work, and refused and give up even when giving up seemed like the only rational choice. And now she was going to marry the man who'd first seen her worth when she'd worn nothing but a ragged dress and desperate determination. It felt like the end of one story and the beginning of another, a better story, one she'd write herself this time. The wedding took place on a Sunday afternoon in June, with the whole town invited and half of them actually showing up. They held the ceremony outdoors on Thad and Alara's new land, under the cottonwood trees with Copper Creek providing natural music in the background. Alara wore a dress that Mrs. Fletcher had sewn, cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar, simple but beautiful. Wildflowers in the surrounding desert filled her arms in a riot of purple and yellow and orange. Micah stood as ring bearer, his chest puffed with importance, his hair slicked down and his new shoes polished to a shine. And Thad wore his best shirt and a vest he borrowed from Mr. Fletcher, looking nervous and happy and more handsome than Alara had ever seen him. The preacher from Redemption Creek officiated, speaking about love and partnership and building life together through faith and hard work. When it came time for vows, Thad took Alara's hands and said, I promise to respect your dreams as much as my own. I promise to be your partner, not your owner. I promise to love you not just when things are easy, but especially when they're hard. I promise to remember where we started and never take for granted how far we've come. And I promise to tell you every single day that you're the finest woman I've ever known. His voice broke on the last words, and Alara saw tears shining in his eyes. She squeezed his hands and said her own vows, promising to build with him, to trust him, to love him for exactly who he was, to never forget that he'd given her hope when she'd lost it completely, when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife. Thad kissed her deeply while their friends and neighbors cheered and whistled and threw flower petals that drifted down like colorful snow. The reception was a potluck affair, with everyone bringing food to share, roasted meat and fresh bread, pies and cakes, Mrs. Fletcher's famous potato salad, and roses tamales that people fought over good-naturedly. Someone had brought a fiddle, someone else a guitar, and soon music filled the air and people were dancing on the grass. Alara saw her students there with their families, saw Mr. Crane from the bank, saw cowboys from Triple Bar and shopkeepers from town, and even a few of the women who'd laughed at her that terrible first night. Those women looked at her differently now, some with genuine warmth, others with envy barely concealed, all of them forced to acknowledge that the poor girl in the ragged dress had become someone they had to respect. Emma, her prize-winning student, gave Alara a beautiful journal and said, "Write down your story, Miss Whitmore, Mrs. Cole. Write it down so other girls like us know it's possible." As the afternoon wore into evening and the celebration continued, Alara found herself standing apart from the crowd for a moment, just watching. Watching Thad laugh with Mr. Fletcher and the ranch hands, watching Micah chase other children through the trees, watching all these people who become her community gather on her land to celebrate her happiness. And she thought about that night 10 months ago when she stood in a different doorway wearing a different dress, carrying nothing but desperation and a small boy's hand in hers. She thought about the laughter that cut like knives, the judgment in all those eyes, the way she felt herself shrinking under the weight of their contempt. She thought about Uncle Samuel's cruel offer, about Cornelius Blackwell, who'd seen her brokenness as an opportunity, about all the ways the world had tried to convince her she was worth less than nothing. And then she thought about Thad's voice cutting through all that mockery. "You are the finest woman here tonight." Those words had changed everything. Not because they'd solved her problems or magically fixed her situation, but because they reminded her that she had worth beyond what others decided to see in her. They'd given her courage to fight for herself, to accept help without shame, to build something new from the ashes of everything she'd lost. Those words had been a gift, but what she'd done with them, that was all hers. Every choice, every sacrifice, every moment of refusing to give up, that was her own strength, her own courage, her own determination to be more than circumstances tried to make her. She'd save herself. Thad had just reminded her she was worth saving. Someone called her name, and Alara turned to see Thad walking toward her with that smile that still made her heart skip. He held out his hand. "Dance with me, Mrs. Cole." She took his hand, feeling the warm weight of her wedding ring, and let him pull her into the circle of dancers. As they spun together under the darkening sky with stars beginning to appear above and music swirling around them, Thad leaned close and whispered, "What are you thinking about?" Alara looked up at him. This man who'd seen her at her lowest and loved her anyway, who'd supported her highest and loved her more, and said truthfully, "I'm thinking about how far we've come, how different everything is from that first night, how grateful I am that you saw something worth defending when nobody else did." Thad pulled her closer, his hand warm against her back. "I didn't see something worth defending," he corrected gently. "I saw someone who was already defending herself. You just needed someone to stand beside you while you fought." His words settled into Alara's heart like truth often does. Unexpected but perfectly right. She hadn't needed rescuing. She'd needed partnership. She hadn't needed someone to solve her problems. She'd needed someone to believe she could solve them herself. And that's exactly what Thad had given her. Not salvation, but solidarity. Not rescue, but respect. Not pity, but partnership. They danced until the moon rose full and bright, until the children fell asleep in their parents' arms, and the older folks began saying their goodbyes, and the celebration wound down to just close friends sitting around a fire, sharing stories and laughter. And when everyone had finally gone home, when Micah was tucked into bed in the new house they'd built together, when it was just Alara and Thad standing on their porch looking out over their land under that vast star-filled sky, Thad said one more time, "You really are the finest woman I've ever known." But this time, Alara didn't just accept the compliment. She turned to him with a smile and said, "I know," because she'd finally learned to believe it herself. Not because she was perfect or because she'd never struggled or because her worth was determined by the dress she wore or the money in her pocket, but because she'd faced impossible circumstances and survived, because she'd chosen courage over surrender, because she'd built a life of meaning and purpose from absolutely nothing. That made her fine. That made her worthy. That made her exactly who she was always meant to be. And as she and Thad walked inside together to begin their first night as husband and wife, Alara carried with her the knowledge that no matter what challenges came next, and there would be challenges, because life was never easy. She would face in the same way she'd faced everything else, with her head high, her heart open, and the unshakable conviction that she deserved to take up space in this world and make it better by being in it. That ragged dress had been burned months ago, turned to ash and carried away by the wind. But the woman who'd worn it, stronger, braver, and more beautiful than she'd ever imagined, she remained. She endured. She thrived. And she lived happily ever after. Not because everything was perfect, but because she'd learned that happiness wasn't something given to you by the world. It was something you built yourself, one courageous choice at a time.